The laugh wasn't just a laugh. It was a symphony of betrayal, a light, airy melody that drifted from the kitchen and stabbed me where I stood frozen in the hallway. Emma's voice, the one that used to whisper promises in my ear, was a conspiratorial murmur now. "Marcus will love Mom's stuffing," she said, and the two words, Marcus and Mom, collided in the air, creating a dissonance that made my teeth ache. He was coming. Here. To my family's Christmas. Behind my back, my fingers tightened around the crisp, heavy stack of paper. The legal-sized envelope felt like a slab of ice against my spine. Petition for dissolution of marriage. It was a cold, formal phrase for the absolute demolition of a life. I had exactly 18 hours. 18 hours until my mother carved the turkey, until my father proposed his annual teary-eyed toast to family, until Marcus, the man who was sleeping with my wife, sat at our table and passed the goddamn gravy. The scent of the house was a lie. It smelled of cinnamon and pine, of baking bread and simmering cider. It smelled of every Christmas we'd ever shared, every memory she was currently taking a match to. But underneath it all, I could smell something else. A faint, cloying sweetness, like rotting flowers. It was the scent of her deception, and it mingled with the festive spices turning my stomach. From my vantage point in the dim hallway, I watched her. She moved with a dancer's grace, a practiced ease that was horrifying in its normalcy. She was adjusting his place setting, his, next to hers, across from my father. She nudged a fork into alignment, smoothed a crease in the crimson placemat, her head tilted with the same concentration she used to apply to our finances, our vacation plans, our future. My hands began to shake. It wasn't from the December chill that seeped through the old window panes. It was a tremor born of adrenaline and a white-hot rage that had been simmering for weeks, a rage I had carefully banked and cooled into something hard and sharp. It was the electric thrill of holding all the cards while your opponent thinks they're about to win the whole pot. She had no idea. She was humming Jingle Bell Rock under her breath, a portrait of holiday cheer, while I stood in the shadows holding the execution order for our marriage. This was Christmas Eve, the season of hope and light. But for me, it had become a countdown. A timer was ticking in my head, each second a loud metallic click. The family would arrive tomorrow at 2, dinner at 3, dessert around 5. By the time my mother brought out her famous pecan pie, this would be over, one way or another. Either I would reclaim the shattered pieces of my dignity, or I would lose everything to the breathtaking scope of her manipulation. I took a deep breath, the cold paper a steadying weight in my hand. 18 hours. The plan was in motion, and this Christmas, the only thing I was giving my wife was the truth, served as cold as the winter stone in my heart. I slipped away from the clatter and cheer, the festive charade grating on my raw nerves. Our home office, once a shared space of collaboration and dreams, now felt like my war room. The glow of the monitor cast long shadows across the desk, illuminating a photo of us in happier times. A trip to Italy, gelato on our noses, our smiles genuine and wide. I turned it face down with a sharp, definitive click. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the message short, brutal, and irreversible. To Richard Hemlock, ESQ. Subject, activate Plan B. Richard. She invited him to Christmas. I want those papers ready for signing by 9 a.m. tomorrow. No delays. Sarah. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was the sound of a drawbridge being raised, a ship burning its own sails. There was no going back. Plan A had been civilized. A quiet conversation after the holidays. An attempt at amicable separation. Plan A was for the woman I thought I had married. Plan B was for the stranger who was setting a place for her lover at my mother's table. "Who are you emailing on Christmas Eve?" Emma's voice, suddenly right behind me, made me jump. I swiveled in the chair, my body instinctively shielding the screen. I forced my face into a mask of nonchalance, a placid lake over a raging volcano. "Just David," I lied, the name of my brother coming easily to my lips. "Confirming tomorrow's timing. Mom's already stressing about the oven schedule." She leaned against the doorframe, a vision in a soft cashmere sweater, a cup of mulled wine in her hand. She studied me for a moment, a flicker of something. Suspicion? Annoyance? In her eyes. "You've been glued to your phone all night. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, my voice a marvel of calm. "Just a lot to wrap up at work before the break." Another lie. I hadn't been able to focus on work for a month. My main project had become a forensic accounting of our lives, cross-referencing credit card statements with her vague excuses for being late. Her phone buzzed then, a cheerful chime from the pocket of her jeans. She pulled it out, and the screen illuminated her face. For a split second, I saw his name. Marcus. And then, the unforgivable part. The part that solidified the steel in my spine. She smiled. Not a small, polite smile. A genuine, warm, intimate smile. The kind she used to give me. She read the message, her thumb caressing the edge of the screen, completely lost in their private world while standing in our shared office, questioning my preoccupation. The audacity of it was a physical blow. She wasn't just cheating, she was flaunting it. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. She thought I was oblivious, a fool. The dutiful, work-obsessed spouse who kept the machinery of our comfortable life running while she sought entertainment elsewhere. The rage I felt was so pure, so clarifying. It burned away any lingering doubt, any shred of sentimentality. This wasn't a mistake she'd made. This was a choice. This was a campaign of disrespect so profound it defied comprehension. "Good news?" I asked, my tone light, conversational. She looked up, her eyes still soft from his message. "Oh, just a friend wishing me a Merry Christmas." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, the lie as casual as a breath. "I'm going to start on the gift wrapping. Are you coming?" "In a minute," I said, turning back to my computer. "I just have one more thing to take care of." "One more thing." She patted away, humming again. I looked at the clock on my screen. 6:07 p.m. Christmas dinner was in less than 22 hours. My lawyer would have the papers ready by 9 tomorrow morning. I'd have to find an excuse to leave my mother's house, a plausible reason to drive across town on Christmas Day. Every detail needed to be perfect, every move calculated. I spent the next hour under the glittering lights of the Christmas tree, surrounded by festive paper and spools of ribbon, helping my wife wrap presents for my family. We worked in a comfortable, familiar silence, a domestic tableau of utter deceit. I handed her the scissors, she passed me the tape. She laughed when our dog tried to eat a stray bow. I smiled back, a hollow, aching thing. With every perfectly folded corner, every neatly tied ribbon, I wasn't just wrapping a gift, I was wrapping a trap. And with every passing minute, the ticking in my head grew louder, a steady drumbeat counting down to the moment I would finally give her something she truly deserved. Christmas morning at my mother's house was a study in controlled chaos. The air was thick with the scent of roasting turkey and my dad's too-strong coffee. My nephews, high on sugar and the promise of presents, tore through the living room like a miniature biker gang, leaving a trail of discarded wrapping paper in their wake. It was warm, it was loud, it was everything Christmas should be, and it all felt like a movie playing on a screen just beyond my reach. My focus was singular. Emma. She was in her element, the gracious daughter-in-law, a whirlwind of helpfulness. But I saw through the performance. I watched her fuss over the guest bedroom, the one she'd insisted on preparing just yesterday. "Marcus has nowhere to go for the holidays," she had announced to my mother over the phone, her voice dripping with synthetic pity. "His family's all in Oregon. It feels so cruel to let him be alone on Christmas." My mother, bless her unsuspecting heart, had readily agreed. "Of course, dear, the more the merrier." Now Emma was fluffing a pillow, arranging a towel on the dresser. She was nesting, making a space for him in the heart of my family home. The violation of it was so profound, it left me breathless. He arrived at precisely 1:30 p.m., just as the first snowflakes began to drift down outside. Marcus. He was exactly as I'd pictured him from the blurry photo I'd found on Emma's cloud backup. Tall, with that easy, practiced charm that slick salesmen and con artists possess. He carried a bottle of expensive-looking red wine and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Eleanor, Bill, thank you so much for having me," he boomed, handing the wine to my mother. He was a performer, and this was his stage. Then he saw Emma. "Emma, Merry Christmas!" He pulled her into a hug. I was standing by the fireplace, pretending to stoke the embers, watching their reflection in the glass of a framed family photo. It wasn't a friendly hug. It was a lover's embrace, shortened for public consumption. His hand lingered on the small of her back, just a beat too long. Her body melted into his for a fraction of a second before she remembered where she was and pulled away, her cheeks flushed. No one else seemed to notice. My dad was already asking Marcus about the drive. My mom was cooing over the wine label. Only David, my brother, caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a subtle, questioning look. He knew something was wrong. He didn't know what, but he knew me. And he knew the look on my face was not one of holiday cheer. The afternoon crawled by. I played the part. I opened my gifts with feigned enthusiasm, a sweater from Mom, a book from David, a sleek new watch from Emma that felt like a bribe on my wrist. I made small talk. I helped my dad carry the magnificent golden brown turkey to the dining table, the weight of it a strange counterpoint to the hollowness in my chest. Finally, we were all seated. The table was groaning with food, a feast of tradition and denial. Marcus was seated between Emma and my Aunt Carol, regaling her with a story about a recent business trip. He was smooth, I had to give him that. He fit in seamlessly, a wolf who had mastered the art of bleeding. The first move was his. He turned to me, his fork poised over a slice of glistening ham. "So, Sarah, Emma tells me you've been working late a lot lately. Big project?" The question was a jab, cloaked in politeness. He was testing the waters, asserting his position as Emma's confidant. The entire table quieted slightly, their attention drawn to our exchange. I took a slow sip of water, letting the moment hang in the air. I looked directly at him, then let my gaze slide to Emma, whose smile had become a little too bright, a little too fixed. "Funny, she's been working late too," I replied, my voice even and calm. "Same project, apparently." I saw a flicker of panic in Emma's eyes. "Different departments, though." She jumped in, her laugh a little too loud. "You know how it is. Crossover stuff, end-of-year crunch?" The table relaxed. A plausible explanation. But I wasn't done. I held Marcus's gaze. "Right," I continued, leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping into a more conspiratorial tone. "That must be why you two were having coffee at Starbucks last Tuesday at 2 p.m. A cross-departmental strategy session, I assume?" Dead silence. The only sound in the entire dining room was the scrape of my father's fork as it hit his plate with a sharp clink. Every eye was now locked on Emma and Marcus. His charming smile had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. Emma's face had gone the color of the mashed potatoes. She looked like a cornered animal, searching for an escape route where there was none. The roaring fire in the hearth suddenly felt like it was sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The cozy, festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by an Arctic chill. I had fired the first shot, a clean hit right through the hull of their deception. I could see the dawning horror and confusion on my parents' faces. I could see the sudden, sharp understanding in my brother's eyes. And I could see the terror in Emma's. She finally, truly understood that I knew. The game had changed, and we were just getting started. The air in the dining room was thick enough to carve with a knife. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was a frozen tableau of shock. Then my phone buzzed on the table, a sharp, insistent vibration against the polished wood. I glanced down. A text from my lawyer. Richard. They're ready. Signed, sealed. My office is closed, but I left the package with my doorman. He's expecting you. Go get him, Sarah. A photo was attached. A thick manila envelope sitting on a marble countertop. My name was written on it in his familiar, spiky handwriting. A surge of triumphant power coursed through me. The weapon was ready. All I had to do was retrieve it. It was the perfect, decisive moment. I had them on the ropes. But as I reached for my phone, a shrill, piercing ring cut through the silence. It wasn't mine. It was Emma's. She fumbled for her purse, her hands trembling so badly she could barely work the clasp. She pulled out her phone, and the name on the screen was not Marcus. It was Jonathan Fields, PLLC, her attorney. Her eyes widened in sheer panic. She shot a desperate, cornered glance at me, then scrambled to her feet, knocking her chair back. I have to take this, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. It's an emergency, a work thing. She fled from the room, phone pressed to her ear, almost tripping over the rug in her haste. The lie was so clumsy, so transparent, it was almost pitiful. An attorney calling on Christmas Day was no work thing, and in that horrifying, gut-wrenching moment, my victory dissolved into ash in my mouth. The power I thought I held, the control I believed I had seized, it all vanished. This wasn't just a reaction. She hadn't just called her lawyer in a panic after I mentioned Starbucks. That call was incoming. He had called her, which meant he was already retained, already working. She wasn't just cheating on me. She had been planning this. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. I wasn't one step ahead of her. I was miles behind. This wasn't a messy affair she was trying to hide. This was a calculated, premeditated exit strategy. She wasn't just looking for a new partner. She was orchestrating a coup. My mind raced, recontextualizing everything. Her recent work trips, her sudden interest in a financial planning course for women, the new password-protected spreadsheet on her laptop I'd mistaken for a Christmas gift list. She wasn't just sleeping with Marcus. She was building a new life with him, and she was planning on funding it with my money. With our money. The divorce papers I was so proud of suddenly felt like a child's toy. A water pistol in a gunfight. While I was plotting to serve her with a petition, she was likely already 2 steps from filing her own, complete with financial affidavits that would paint me as an absentee spouse, and her as the deserving, neglected party. Tomorrow, I would discover the true extent of it. I knew it with a sickening certainty. I would wake up to find our joint savings account drained. I would learn about investment accounts I never knew existed, opened with funds siphoned off quietly over months. She wasn't just leaving me. She was planning to gut me, to leave me with the mortgage, the bills, and the hollowed-out shell of our life, while she and Marcus sailed off into the sunset on my 401k. The power hadn't just shifted. It had been an illusion all along. I had been playing checkers while she was playing three-dimensional chess. Emma returned to the dining room a few minutes later. Her face was pale, but her expression was different. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had spoken to her counsel. She had her instructions. The mask was off. She walked directly to me, ignoring the stunned faces of my family. Her voice was low, devoid of all its previous warmth, a flat, metallic thing. "Sarah," she said, not a request, but a command. "We need to talk, privately, now." I looked up at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the woman she had become. A stranger with my wife's face. A ruthless, calculating operator who saw our marriage not as a partnership, but as a corporation to be liquidated for her own benefit. My plan was in shambles. The confrontation I had engineered had only served to accelerate hers. But as I stared into her cold, determined eyes, something inside me shifted. The shock gave way to a new kind of fire. It wasn't the hot rage of a betrayed spouse anymore. It was the icy, focused fury of a fighter who had just been knocked down and was getting back up, blood in her mouth and a new strategy forming in her mind. If she wanted a war, she would get one. But it wouldn't be fought on her terms. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting her off. I pushed my chair back and stood up, addressing my bewildered family. "I apologize, everyone. It seems I have an urgent errand to run." I looked at Emma, a predator's smile touching my lips. "A last-minute Christmas gift I forgot to pick up." The drive was a blur of Christmas lights and swirling snow. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The engine's hum a low growl that matched the one in my chest. I wasn't just going to my lawyer's doorman to pick up a package. I was going to rearm. My initial strategy, a simple emotional checkmate, was now obsolete. This was no longer about exposing an affair. This was about survival. The doorman, a stout man named George, who smelled faintly of peppermint schnapps, handed me the manila envelope with a knowing nod. "Mr. Hemlock said you'd be by. Merry Christmas, miss." "Merry Christmas, George," I replied, the words feeling foreign and absurd. Back in the car, I tore open the envelope. The stark, black and white print of the legal documents was a comfort. It was real, tangible, but it wasn't enough. Tucked inside was a sticky note from Richard. "Sarah, if Plan B goes sideways, call my cell. There's always a Plan C." I drove not back to my mother's, but to a 24-hour pharmacy. Inside, under the buzzing fluorescent lights, I found the wrapping paper aisle. I selected the most ridiculously cheerful paper I could find, a pattern of dancing snowmen with candy cane noses. I also bought a large, festive gift bag, crimson red with glittering gold handles, and a tag that read, "A special gift for a special someone." At a quiet corner of the pharmacy's parking lot, with the car's dome light on, I carefully placed the divorce papers inside the gift bag. It was a Trojan horse, just as I'd planned, but now its purpose was different. It wasn't just a reveal, it was a declaration of war. It was a message. I know what you're doing, and you will not win. When I walked back into my mother's house, the atmosphere had curdled. The remnants of the feast sat on the table, looking like the aftermath of a battle. My family was scattered around the living room, speaking in hushed, anxious tones. Emma and Marcus were huddled together by the far window, their backs to the room, whispering furiously. They looked up as I entered, their conversation ceasing abruptly. I smiled brightly, holding up the garish gift bag. "Found it!" I announced to the room at large. I walked over to the Christmas tree and placed the bag conspicuously beneath its branches, arranging it so the tag was clearly visible. "For Emma, open after dessert." The bait was set. We moved on to dessert, a somber affair. My mother served her pecan pie, her hands unsteady, her usual holiday chatter replaced by a strained silence. I watched Emma. She couldn't take her eyes off the gift bag under the tree. Every few seconds, her gaze would flicker towards it, a moth drawn to a flame that promised to incinerate it. She was trying to calculate, to game out the possibilities. What was in the bag? How much did I really know? Was it just the divorce papers? Or was it something more? "Emma, dear, you seem nervous," my mother observed, her voice gentle but laced with concern. "You've barely touched your pie." Emma forced a laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "Just excited about dessert, Eleanor, and all the presents." Sweat beaded on her forehead, a tiny, glistening jewel of guilt. She dabbed at it with her napkin. I decided it was time to turn up the heat. I took a bite of my pie, savoring the sweetness before I spoke. My voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with false innocence. "Speaking of excitement," I said, looking directly at Marcus, "how long have you and Emma been planning your future together? It must be thrilling, starting a new life." The entire table went rigid. My dad stopped with his fork halfway to his mouth. My brother, David, leaned forward, his expression grim and focused. This was no longer about a secret coffee. I had just publicly framed their affair as a premeditated conspiracy. Emma's eyes darted from me to Marcus, then to the gift bag under the tree. I saw the frantic calculation in her gaze. She was running through every lie she'd told me, every dollar she'd moved, trying to assess her exposure. She was a master manipulator, but for the first time she was operating without a full deck. She didn't know what I knew. She didn't know what was in the bag, and that uncertainty was eating her alive. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Marcus, for all his practiced charm, looked like a fish gasping for air. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, no smooth words coming to his rescue. It was Emma who finally broke the silence. "Sarah, this is inappropriate." "Is it?" I countered, my sweet tone gone, replaced by ice. "I think it's very appropriate. It's Christmas, a time for family. And Marcus, you're trying so hard to be part of this one. I just think we should all be clear on what your role here actually is." I let my eyes drift meaningfully towards the gift bag. "Your move." The last slice of pie had been served. The last drop of coffee had been poured. The festive holiday playlist my dad had so carefully curated had fallen silent, leaving a ringing quiet in its place. The entire evening had been a slow, agonizing march toward this single moment. I stood up, wiping my mouth with a napkin, every movement deliberate. "Well," I said, my voice resonating in the tense room, "I think it's time for one last gift." I walked to the tree and retrieved the crimson gift bag. It felt heavy in my hands, weighted with the finality of it all. I walked back to the table and placed it in front of Emma. Her hands were flat on the table, as if to keep them from trembling. "I thought you should open this one first," I said, my voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the room. "Since it's about new beginnings." The whole family watched, their faces a mixture of dread and rapt attention. My mother looked like she was about to cry. My father's jaw was set like granite. David stood silently behind my chair, a sentinel. With shaking hands, Emma reached into the bag. The crinkle of the tissue paper was obscenely loud. She pulled out the thick manila envelope, her name staring up at her. She fumbled with the clasp, her fingers clumsy. She slid out the top page, her eyes scanning the header. "In the family court of the state of petition for dissolution of marriage." The color drained from her face. She went so white, so utterly bloodless, that she seemed to blend into the white tablecloth. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What is it, honey?" my mother asked, her voice trembling with innocence. Divorce papers, Emma whispered, the words barely audible. Then her voice rose, cracking with indignation. Divorce papers? Sarah, you can't be serious. Not here, not now. Oh, but I am, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. I am deadly serious. Especially since you already cleaned out our joint savings account yesterday. All $53,000 of it. Yes, I added, seeing the shock on her face. I got the bank alert this morning. A collective gasp went around the table. My father stood up abruptly. She what? The accusation hung in the air, undeniable and ugly. Emma's carefully constructed victimhood began to crumble. You were never home, she shouted, her voice shrill, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the hardwood floor. You were always working. You never paid attention to me. It was the classic cheater's gambit. Deflect, accuse, rewrite history. But I was ready for it. I was paying attention, I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. I was paying attention to the mortgage on this house. I was paying attention to the car payments. I was paying attention to the credit card bills from your shopping sprees. And yes, I was working. I was working to pay for this very comfortable life you were so eager to steal from under me. And Marcus, I said, turning my gaze to him. I guess he was just such good company during all that hard work. Marcus, who had been trying to shrink into his chair, pushed it back. I think I should go. He made a move to leave, to escape the blast radius, but David moved faster. My brother, my silent, watchful ally, stepped away from my side and blocked the doorway, his arms crossed over his broad chest. I don't think so, David said, his voice a low rumble. I think you should stay and hear how this ends. Trapped. They were both trapped. And then the universe delivered the final, poetic piece of evidence. Emma's phone, sitting on the table beside her plate, buzzed and lit up with a new text message. In her panicked, frantic state, she glanced down at it, her eyes scanning the preview on the lock screen. And without thinking, driven by pure adrenalized panic, she read the first line aloud, her voice a horrified, incredulous whisper. Did she sign yet? My lawyer says we can file first thing Monday. The words echoed in the stunning silence. It wasn't my accusation. It wasn't my evidence. It was theirs, in their own words. A direct line from Marcus's pocket to this room, laying bare the full, rotten scope of their plan. They weren't just having an affair. They weren't just planning a future. They were coordinating a legal and financial ambush, and they had just confessed to it in front of my entire family. The room erupted. My mother's quiet sob broke. My father let out a string of curses that I'd never heard him utter in my entire life. My Aunt Carol was staring at Marcus with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Through the chaos, I remained calm. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sleek, red fountain pen. A gift from Emma, 2 Christmases ago. The irony was exquisite. I uncapped it with a deliberate click. Then I picked up the top page of the petition, the signature page, and slid it across the polished surface of the dining table until it stopped directly in front of her. Sign it, Emma, I said. My voice was no longer angry. It was empty. Sign it, and get out of my house. The silence that followed their departure was heavier than the preceding chaos. Marcus had practically sprinted out the door the second David moved, with Emma trailing behind him, not with a bang, but with a pathetic, whimpering retreat. She hadn't even taken the ridiculous gift bag. It sat on the floor by her abandoned chair, a garish monument to her spectacular self-destruction. I stood by the window, watching the taillights of Marcus's car disappear into the swirling snow. I felt a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, but also a sliver of something else. A clean, quiet peace. I turned back to my family. They were looking at me, their faces etched with concern, anger, and a fierce, protective love. My dad walked over and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of coffee and Old Spice and unconditional support. "I am so sorry, Sarah," he murmured into my hair. "We had no idea." My mom was next, her eyes red-rimmed but her grip strong. "She never deserved you." In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage but cocooned in the unwavering strength of my family, I knew I would be okay. My last words to her, uttered just before she scurried out the door, played over in my mind. She had looked at me, one last time, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes as if expecting some last-minute reprieve. There was none. "Merry Christmas, Emma," I had said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I hope Marcus enjoys paying your legal fees." The stinger had landed. The door had closed. A chapter, a whole volume of my life, was over. 6 months later. The scent of my new apartment was of fresh paint, lemon polish, and my mother's famous stuffing baking in the oven. It was Easter, and the small, sun-drenched space was filled with the same people who had witnessed my life implode on Christmas Day. But the atmosphere was entirely different. It was light. It was joyful. It was real. My divorce from Emma had been brutal, but swift. My plan C had been to give Richard, my lawyer, the green light to be as aggressive as legally possible. The text message David had heard her read aloud became a sworn affidavit. The bank records of the transferred savings were undeniable. Her attorney, Jonathan Fields, quickly realized he was defending a losing hand and pushed her to settle. She didn't get the house. She didn't get half of my retirement. She got her personal belongings and a bill for her lawyer's fees. As a final parting gift, when my forensic accountant uncovered a series of hidden accounts she and Marcus had been funding with undeclared income from his consulting business, I had an anonymous tip sent to the IRS. The audit, I heard through the grapevine, was ongoing and vicious. They were so busy hiding assets from me, they'd forgotten to declare them to the government. I was hosting Easter dinner, not in the grand dining room I had once thought was the measure of my success, but at a modest table for 6 in my bright, airy apartment that was entirely my own. My name was the only one on the lease. The peace of that was immeasurable. My mom brought out the glazed ham, and my dad proposed a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes finding mine, "and to strong women who know their worth." We all raised our glasses. David winked at me from across the table. He had brought his new girlfriend, Chloe, a warm, funny architect who looked at my brother with genuine adoration. There were no secrets in her eyes, no hidden agendas. After dessert, while Chloe was admiring a painting on my wall, David caught my eye and gave a subtle nod toward the centerpiece on the table, a vase of bright spring tulips. He'd told me his plan earlier that week. Life tasted better when you weren't swallowing lies with every bite. The bitterness of Emma's betrayal had faded, replaced by the savory taste of freedom and the sweet promise of a future I was building for myself, on my own terms. I watched as David walked over to Chloe, took her hand, and led her toward the table, his face alight with a nervous, beautiful hope. He was about to give her his own special gift, one that, unlike mine to Emma, was meant to build a life, not dismantle one. I took a sip of my wine and smiled. Some gifts, I thought, take months to fully unwrap. The divorce papers I'd given Emma on that cold Christmas night had been a gift to myself, one that had taken half a year to reveal its true, brilliant contents. My life returned to me,